My name is Lily Ann. I'm 32 years old, and if you'd asked me a month ago, I would have said I knew exactly who I was, a driven financial strategist, the youngest, to head a division at my firm in Manhattan, living in a sleek apartment that was mine and mine alone. But none of that mattered in the grand scheme of things, not when it came to my father, Charles Ann. For as long as I can remember, my father measured people by their accomplishments, specifically how those accomplishments reflected back on him. He'd built an empire in commercial real estate, turning a rundown Boston warehouse into the headquarters of a regional powerhouse, and he never let anyone forget it. Our family name was practically a brand, and every family gathering felt like a trade show for his legacy. This year, I thought I'd finally be able to prove I belonged. I bought him the car he always mentioned, with a half smile and a spark in his eyes, a black Mercedes S-Class with a sleek finish and every luxury feature money could buy. It cost nearly a year of my salary, but I didn't care. I thought it would buy me the one thing I'd never been able to earn his approval. Growing up, our home looked like a picture from a glossy magazine, white columns, manicured lawns, expensive art that never felt quite real. But underneath the polished surfaces, there was an unspoken tension that pressed down on everything. My mother Margaret was gracious in public, but small in her own skin when my father was near, always careful not to ruffle his moods. My older brother Nathan was the Golden Boy Star quarterback in high school, straight into the family business after college, always saying the right thing at the right time. My younger sister Claire was the peacemaker, always reading the room and smoothing over the sharp edges of my father's temper. And me, I was the one who refused to follow the script. Instead of joining the family firm, I packed up and moved to New York, sleeping on a friend's couch while I worked night shifts at a diner and sent resumes to every financial firm that would listen. I wanted to build something that was mine, something that didn't have my father's fingerprints on it. When I finally got an entry-level job at one of the top firms in the city, I called home to share the news. My father's only response was, "Let's see if you can keep it." And I did. I built my career inch by inch, driven by equal parts ambition and a stubborn desire to prove him wrong. So when I bought that Mercedes for him, I thought it would be the gesture that finally cracked his icy reserve. My best friend Cassie warned me it might not work. "He's never going to change Lily," she said. But I wanted to believe. I needed to believe. The night before the annual family reunion, I drove to my parents' estate in the suburbs of Boston. I'd arranged for the car to be delivered to a nearby dealership, and I picked it up myself, fingers tight on the wheel, as I navigated the winding roads to the house I'd never really called home. My father answered the door in his usual button-down and pressed slacks even on a Saturday. His eyebrows lifted slightly at the sight of me. "Lily Ann. You're early?" he said, his tone as neutral as ever. "I wanted to give you your Father's Day gift privately," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I handed him the small box with the car key inside. He opened it, his lips twitching with the faintest smile before it vanished. "This is extravagant," he said, but he didn't refuse it. He walked to the window, peering out at the Mercedes in the driveway, its polished black body gleaming in the dusk. "What are you trying to prove?" he asked, turning back to me. "Nothing," I lied. "I wanted to do something special. I got a big promotion." I tried to keep my voice even, but my heart was hammering in my chest. He walked around the car, twice opening the doors, testing the features. It felt less like a father appreciating a gift, and more like an investor appraising a new property. After a short drive around the block, he parked it in the garage, hidden away from the world. "You must be doing very well to spend money like this," he said, a faint note of disapproval in his voice that cut deeper than any outright insult. That night back at my hotel, I called Cassie. "He didn't even say thank you," I told her, my voice shaking. "Take it back," she urged. "He doesn't deserve it, Lily." But I couldn't. I still held on to the fantasy that tomorrow would be different. The morning of the reunion dawned bright and breezy, the kind of day that felt like a promise. I chose a pale blue dress that felt both strong and soft, with delicate jewelry that wouldn't overshadow me. The estate looked like something out of a magazine, white tents in the garden, waiters carrying trays of sparkling drinks, Cousins and old family friends gathered in clusters. Inside, my mother kissed my cheek, her eyes flickering with worry. "You look beautiful, darling," she said, tucking a stray curl behind my ear. "Your father is in the back with the McKenna group." I moved through the crowd like a ghost in my own life. Polite smiles pasted on as people asked the same tired questions about my job, my love life, my future plans. Nathan arrived with his perfect wife and their two perfect kids, and my father's face lit up in the way it never did for me. When Nathan clapped him on the shoulder and said, "The new car is incredible, Dad," my father beamed and said, "Sometimes you have to reward yourself," as if I'd never been part of it. Claire found me near the window, her eyes sympathetic. "He's been showing off that car to everyone," she said. "But he never mentioned it was from you." I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "It's fine." But in that moment, I knew it wasn't. Because no matter how much I gave it would never be enough for him. I didn't know it yet, but that day would change everything I thought I knew about who I was and who I was meant to be. The family reunion was in full swing by the time the dinner bell rang, the clinking of crystal glasses and polite laughter, a thin veil over the tension that always simmered beneath the surface. I moved through the grand foyer of the estate with practiced poise, each step echoing my mother's whispered instruction. "Don't give him a reason to dismiss you, Lily Ann." But the truth was, he didn't need a reason. My father's disdain was woven into the air. We breathed an unspoken rule that governed everything. He held court in the garden, surrounded by men in tailored suits, who hung on his every word. My mother hovered nearby, her smile tight, as she refilled drinks and kept the conversation flowing. Nathan was in his element, telling stories about the latest building he was converting into luxury apartments, each word carefully chosen to impress. My father leaned back in his chair, nodding approvingly, a proud king surveying his kingdom. I stayed on the periphery, nursing a glass of white wine that tasted like nothing at all. My sister Claire found me again, her brow furrowed, as she pressed a hand to my arm. "You okay?" she asked softly. "I'm fine," I lied. But the truth was, the weight of that lie pressed against my ribs like a steel band. As the sun set and the sky turned to dusky pink, the guests were called to the long dining table set up under the lantern-lit arbor. My father sat at the head with Nathan on his right and Claire on his left. I was 3 seats down next to a cousin I barely knew, and one of my father's younger business partners who seemed more interested in his phone than in the polite small talk I attempted. The first course was served with military precision seared scallops on tiny plates, each placement choreographed for maximum effect. My father rose glass in hand and cleared his throat. "Family," he said, his voice warm and polished, the kind of voice that could charm investors and disarm critics. "Tonight, we gather not just to share a meal, but to celebrate the legacy we're building together." His gaze swept the table, pausing on Nathan, who beamed like he'd won a medal. Nathan's project in the Seaport District is the kind of bold move this family was built on. My father continued raising his glass. To the Anne name someone called out, and glasses clinked all around. He moved on to Claire, praising her volunteer work and the grace with which she balanced family and community. I watched her smile, a flicker of discomfort in her eyes that she quickly masked. When his gaze finally landed on me, it was fleeting, as if I were a piece of furniture in the background of his carefully curated life. By the time the main course arrived, beef tenderloin so tender, it practically fell apart on my fork. I felt like I was floating above the table, watching the scene play out in slow motion. My father asked me a few polite questions about my work, but every answer felt like it was being weighed and found wanting. "Investment banking," he said at one point, his voice cool. "It's a volatile game, Lily Ann. Not like real estate, real assets last." "Actually, Dad," I said, forcing a calm, "I didn't feel our risk assessment model has outperformed the market for the last 3 quarters." My tone was even professional, my voice from boardrooms, not family dinners. He didn't even bother to look at me. "Numbers on paper," he said with a dismissive wave. "Real assets endure. Paper can burn." I excused myself to refresh my drink, my pulse pounding in my ears. In the hallway, Claire found me again. Don't let him get to you, she whispered. I heard about your promotion from my friend's husband. He said your name's coming up in every meeting. Thanks, I murmured. But her words felt like a salve on a wound that had been festering for years. I stepped into the study, seeking a moment of quiet. The heavy door was slightly ajar, and I heard my father's voice, low and confidential. The car. It was time for an upgrade, he was saying. A reward for years of hard work. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. He was talking to one of his old friends, a man I'd known since I was a child. Lily Ann bought it for you, right? His friend asked. A pause. Then my father's voice, calm and deliberate. She's always been eager to show she can keep up. But everything she's achieved, every advantage came from me. She just doesn't realize it. The words felt like a slap. My fists clenched at my sides as I fought the urge to burst into the room and scream the truth he refused to see. Instead, I turned away, my heart, a thunderclap in my chest. Back at the table, I forced a smile and answered questions in measured tones, my mind racing. As dessert was served, a rich chocolate torte that tasted like ash in my mouth, I realized something else. I'd spent my whole life dancing for scraps of his approval, twisting myself into shapes I thought he'd like, never realizing he would never truly see me. The thought was like a crack of lightning in my chest, terrifying and illuminating all at once. After dinner, my father stood again, brandy in hand. Before we go inside for the family portrait, he said, his tone warm and authoritative. I want to thank my children for making this family what it is. He turned to Nathan. Your leadership and ambition carry this name forward. Nathan's grin was wide and sure. Then to Claire, your compassion and wisdom make us stronger. His eyes landed on me last, and for a moment, I thought just maybe he'd say something real, something true. But he didn't. He raised his glass higher and said, and for the rest of us, may we continue to learn from those who build, not just those who chase. A ripple of polite laughter ran around the table, and I sat frozen, my face burning, as my father toasted the future he never saw me in. That night, as I lay awake in my hotel room, my mind replayed the scene over and over, each word a fresh cut. But beneath the hurt, something new was taking shape. A decision. A question I couldn't ignore. Who was I living for? And what would it take to finally claim my own worth? I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake in my hotel bed, the city lights of Boston shimmering beyond the window, as if they could offer some comfort. But there was none. My father's words echoed in my mind. She's always been eager to show she can keep up. Everything she's achieved came from me. Each time I replayed them, a fresh wave of anger and shame washed over me. I didn't go back to the estate the next morning. Instead, I wandered through the public garden, the early summer air crisp and cool, the swan boats gliding serenely across the water. I clutched my phone in one hand, reading and rereading the last message my mother had sent me before I left the dinner the night before. Come back, Lily. We can talk. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. By the time I returned to my hotel, my phone was full of messages. Claire's were gentle, full of quiet understanding. I'm here when you're ready. Nathan's were predictably businesslike, asking if I was coming to the brunch Father was hosting that morning. And my father's nothing. Of course. But there was another message I hadn't expected. It was from my mother, but different from the others. Different even from the careful warmth she usually offered. There's something I need to tell you, Lily Ann. Please meet me. Just us. My pulse quickened as I read it. A part of me was terrified of what she might say, of the secrets she'd kept. But another part of me, the part that had always known there was more to our family's carefully crafted image, felt a surge of determination. We met later that day at a small cafe near the river, one my mother used to take me to when I was little, back when I still believed she could fix anything with a soft word and a warm smile. She looked older than I remembered her face, lined with a worry that no amount of makeup could hide. She didn't waste time. Lily, she said, her voice low but clear, there's something I should have told you a long time ago. My hands went cold around my coffee cup. What is it? She took a deep breath. When I was in college, before I met your father, there was someone else. His name was Thomas. He was brilliant kind, but not the man my parents thought I should be with. When I found out I was pregnant, my family insisted I end things and marry your father instead. I blinked the words, struggling to find purchase in my mind. You're saying, she nodded, her eyes glistening. Charles isn't your biological father, Lily. He knew when we married. He agreed to raise you as his own, but he never really did not. In the way you deserved. I stared at her, the ground shifting under my feet. It made sense in a terrible, perfect way. The coldness, the distance, the constant feeling that I was a guest in my own family's life, it wasn't in my head. It was real. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling as she touched mine. I thought I was protecting you by keeping it secret, she said, her voice cracking. But I see now it only hurt you more. I pulled my hand back gently. I need time to think, I said, my voice hoarse. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I understand. I walked out of that cafe into a world that felt both entirely familiar and utterly changed. My father, no Charles, wasn't my father. The man I'd spent my life trying to impress, trying to love, wasn't even connected to me by blood. It explained so much, but it didn't dull the hurt. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, walking aimlessly along the river, the sun warm on my shoulders, but my insides cold and raw. At some point, I found myself back at my hotel room, sitting on the edge of the bed, with my phone in my hand. That's when I saw it, the file I'd created months earlier, after I'd taken a recreational DNA test out of curiosity. The results had been inconclusive, but they'd planted a seed of doubt I hadn't been able to shake. I'd even gone so far as to collect a hair from Charles's brush, the last time I'd visited, sending it to a lab for a definitive test. The envelope with the results had been sitting in my purse ever since unopened. My heart pounded as I held it in my hands now. I thought of everything that had happened, the car, the dinner, the way he'd looked right through me, and I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. With shaking hands, I tore it open. The words were stark and final. No biological relationship detected. I read it twice, 3 times, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something else. But they didn't. I wasn't his daughter. And he'd known. He'd known all along. I thought I'd feel shattered, but instead, I felt something different. A strange, icy clarity. All the years I'd spent twisting myself in knots, all the ways I'd tried to be good enough, it had never been about me. It had always been about him. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the window watching the lights of the city fade into dawn, the envelope on the table beside me, like a tiny white flag of surrender and freedom all at once. I didn't know what would come next. But for the first time in my life, I felt like the story wasn't his to write anymore. The morning after opening the test results, I woke up feeling like I was made of glass, fragile, transparent, as if every step I took might shatter me. I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Same face, same eyes. But everything felt different. I didn't have the luxury of disappearing. My phone buzzed again and again, with messages from Claire, gentle and insistent. Where are you? Are you okay? Nathan's were colder, his words clipped and controlled, demanding I come back home and face the family. But I couldn't bring myself to call it home anymore. I decided to meet with my mother again. She'd texted me that morning, asking to see me. The cafe was the same one from the day before, but everything else felt brand new. She was already there when I arrived, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Lily Ann, she said softly, standing to hug me. I let her, but it felt like an embrace of 2 strangers. Why didn't you tell me sooner? My voice was calm, but underneath, it felt like I was holding back a scream. She looked at me, eyes glistening. I thought it would be easier if you didn't know. Your father, Charles. He always promised he'd love you like his own. I believed him. I took a breath, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. But he didn't. He never did. She flinched, and for a moment I felt guilty for the truth in my words. I know, she whispered. I saw it. But I didn't know how to fix it. I thought if I just tried harder, if I didn't make waves. I shook my head. It's not your job to fix him. It never was. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. I'm so sorry, Lily. I failed you in ways I'll never be able to undo. I wanted to tell her it was okay, but it wasn't. And for the first time, I wasn't going to pretend it was. We sat in silence for a while, the low hum of conversations around us, a gentle white noise. She told me more about Thomas, the man who was my biological father. How they'd met in college, how he'd been everything Charles wasn't. How her parents had disapproved of him, how they'd pushed her to marry Charles instead. He never knew about you, she said. Thomas, I mean. He moved to California after graduation. He has a family now, a life he built on his own. I never wanted to disrupt that. But maybe you deserve to know him. The thought of another father, someone who might look at me without judgment, who might see me as his own, felt like both a lifeline and a fresh wound. I wasn't sure I was ready for it, but it was a choice that was finally mine to make. When I left the cafe, my mother hugged me again. This time, it felt a little less like strangers, a little more like two women trying to find each other in the wreckage of the past. I spent the rest of the day in Boston, walking familiar streets with a new sense of freedom. The weight of my father's expectations felt lighter now, like chains that had finally snapped. But when I returned to my hotel, reality was waiting for me. There was a message from Nathan Dad's asking about the car. He wants it back. I almost laughed. Of course! The Mercedes, the grand gesture I'd made in a desperate bid for acceptance, was still all he saw. Not me, just the car. There was another message, this one from Charles himself: return the Mercedes immediately. We will discuss further once you've complied. The cold finality of his words settled in my chest like a stone. I stared at the phone, my fingers tightening around it. Then, I remembered the night of the reunion, how he'd shown off the car like it was his prize, never once mentioning me. How he'd erased me from the story of my own generosity. And I decided I wasn't going to let him keep it. Not the car. Not my self-worth. The next morning, I drove back to the estate. The Mercedes was parked in the same place he'd put it that first night, gleaming in the early sun. My mother saw me pull in and came out to meet me, her face pale. Lily, she said, her voice trembling. He's in his office. Are you sure? I nodded. I'm sure. I walked through the house I'd once called home, every polished surface a testament to the illusion he'd created. I paused at the door to his study, took a breath, and knocked. Come in, his voice said, calm and imperious. He was seated behind his massive oak desk, papers spread out before him, like a general's battle plans. He looked up when I entered, his expression cool and assessing. Lily Ann, he said, I assume you're here to do the right thing. I didn't bother sitting down. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope with the DNA test. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't say a word as I placed it on the desk in front of him. It's over, I said quietly. I know, and I think you've known all along. His jaw tightened, but he didn't move. For a moment, I almost thought he might deny it, but he didn't. He just picked up the envelope, glanced at the name on the top, and set it back down with a faint, dismissive shrug. This changes nothing, he said, his voice cold and even. You're still part of this family whether you like it or not. I met his gaze without flinching. No, I'm not. I never was. And I'm done pretending. I turned and walked out of the study, the finality of that moment ringing in my chest like a bell. As I stepped back into the bright summer light, I felt something new in my bones resolve. Not anger, not grief, just the calm, certain knowledge that I was done living by his rules. The Mercedes sat in the driveway, its black paint shimmering in the sun. I walked over, unlocked it, and slid into the driver's seat. For a moment, I sat there, breathing in the scent of leather and memory. Then I turned the key and drove away. In the rearview mirror, the estate grew smaller with each passing mile. And with every turn of the wheel, I felt lighter, like I was finally steering my own life free from the shadows of the man who had tried so hard to keep me in them. I drove until the sky turned the color of molten gold, the city fading in my rearview mirror. With each mile, the weight of Charles' expectations lifted from my shoulders like layers of old skin. It was as if the car's engine was powered by my determination each turn of the wheel, carrying me further from a life I'd spent too long trying to fit into. I didn't know exactly where I was going, only that I needed distance. I stopped at a small motel an hour outside the city, the kind of place where the carpet smelled like old cigarettes, and the walls were thin enough to hear the hum of life in every room. It felt strangely comforting. No pretense, no polished surfaces to hide behind. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed with the DNA results in my lap. The paper was crisp and white, the words printed in black and white certainty. No biological relationship, no shared blood. I thought of all the times I'd looked in the mirror, searching for traces of Charles's features in my face. His cold blue eyes, the sharp line of his jaw. I thought of how every achievement of mine had felt like it needed to be bigger, better, more, just to earn a nod from him that never came. Now I saw the truth. It was never about me. It was about him. About the way he clung to control, about the narrative he'd built around the Ann family name. I wasn't a part of that story. I never had been. But I could write my own. The next morning, I drove back to Boston. The city skyline rose in the distant steel and glass, catching the early light. My phone buzzed with more messages, Claire checking in Nathan's clipped demands, my mother's quiet pleas for a conversation. But I ignored them all. For the first time in my life, I was choosing silence over explanation. Instead, I called Cassie. "Lily!" She answered, her voice thick with sleep. "Can I come by?" I asked. I need someone to hear me." Her voice softened. "Of course. I'll put the coffee on." Cassie lived in a cozy apartment near the Charles River, the kind of place that felt alive and warm, in a way the Ann estate never did. She opened the door in sweatpants and a messy bun, wrapping me in a hug that felt like safety. "Talk to me," she said, as she poured coffee into mismatched mugs. So I did. I told her everything, the truth about my paternity, the dinner, the way my father had erased me in front of a room full of people. "He never saw me, Cass," I said, my voice cracking. "No matter how hard I tried, he never did." She reached across the table, her fingers wrapping around mine. "You know what I see when I look at you? I see a woman who built her life from scratch, who didn't let anyone define her worth. That's real, Lily. That's yours." I swallowed hard, her words settling deep into the cracks inside me. "It still hurts," I admitted. "Even knowing the truth, it still hurts." "Of course it does," she said softly. "But you're not defined by him, or his name, or what he sees when he looks at you. You're defined by what you see when you look in the mirror." I stayed with Cassie for most of the day, the comfort of her small apartment, a balm to the chaos swirling inside me. We talked about everything, my plans for the future, the parts of me I'd been too afraid to claim. And for the first time, I let myself imagine what life could look like if I stopped trying to earn a place in someone else's story. That evening, I returned to my hotel. My mother was waiting in the lobby, her face drawn and pale. "Lily," she said, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, then nodded. We sat in the corner of the lounge, the low murmur of other guests creating a cocoon of privacy. "I know I've hurt you," she said, tears pooling in her eyes. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I just played the role of the perfect wife and mother, it would be enough. But I see now how much that silence cost you." I looked at her, at the woman who had always seemed so small in Charles's shadow. "Why didn't you ever leave?" I asked quietly. Her shoulders slumped. "Because I was scared. Scared of what it would mean to break the facade. Scared of how it would change everything." She reached for my hand. "But I don't want to be scared anymore. I don't want you to be either." For a moment, I saw her not the perfect hostess, not the woman who kept the peace, but a mother who was just as lost as I was. And something in me softened. "I'm not angry," I said softly. "Not anymore. But I need to figure out what this means for me. Who I am without all this." She nodded, her lips trembling. "I'll be here, Lily. Whatever you need, I'll be here." When she left, I sat in the quiet of my room, the city lights outside the window flickering like distant stars. I thought of Thomas, the man who was my biological father, and wondered if he knew I existed, if he would want to. It was a question that would have terrified me once, but now it felt like possibility, a door cracked open, waiting for me to choose whether or not to step through. I took out my phone and started drafting an email to him. I didn't send it, not yet, but I let the words come anyway. My name is Lily Ann. I think you might be my biological father. It was the first step, my step. No longer about Charles or the Ann name or the legacy he'd tried to force me into. Just about me. I closed the draft and set the phone aside. In the quiet, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't the wild, desperate hope that Charles would someday see me. It was a quieter, steadier thing. A hope that maybe I could build something real for myself. Something that wasn't about proving my worth to anyone but me. I fell asleep that night with the window open, the sounds of the city drifting in like a lullaby. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't dream of him. I dreamed of myself standing tall in the light of my own becoming. The days that followed felt like walking on a tightrope between the past and the future. My mother called every morning, her voice soft and hesitant, checking in without pressing. Claire texted me daily too, her words always the same: "I'm proud of you no matter what." Nathan's silence was louder than anything he could have said. As for Charles, he didn't call. He didn't write. It was as if, once the truth was out, I'd become an inconvenience he no longer had to pretend to care about. And for the first time, I was okay with that. I spent the next week working from my hotel, letting the rhythm of spreadsheets and market trends anchor me in a reality I could control. My boss didn't ask questions about why I wasn't in the office. He'd seen my numbers and knew my value didn't depend on proximity. One evening, Claire asked to meet for dinner. We chose a small bistro on the waterfront, the kind of place where the candlelight made everything feel softer. She arrived first, already sipping a glass of white wine. "You look different," she said as I sat down. "Lighter." I managed a smile. "I feel different." We talked for hours about the family, about how she'd always seen the way Charles treated me, even if she hadn't always known what to do. "I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you more," she said, her eyes shimmering. "You did in your own way," I told her. "And you're doing it now." She nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Whatever you decide about the car, about Thomas, I'll stand with you. You deserve to choose what your life looks like." That night, I walked back to my hotel, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: supported. A few days later, I made my decision. I returned the Mercedes, but not to Charles. Instead, I left it at the dealership along with a note: "A gift should come from the heart, not be used as leverage. This no longer belongs to me or to you." I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. I didn't need to. It was my choice, my boundary. And then finally, I opened the email draft to Thomas. My finger hovered over the send button for a long moment. Then I pressed it. The reply came 2 days later. His words were careful but warm. "Lily Ann, I was shocked to hear from you, but I'm open to meeting. I'm in New York next month for a conference. If you're willing, I'd like to get coffee." My heart pounded as I read it, but this time it wasn't fear, it was possibility. When I told my mother, she wept. "You deserve to know where you came from," she said, "and I'll support you whatever happens." I didn't have answers yet. I didn't know what Thomas would be like, if he'd be the father I'd always wanted, or just another stranger. But I knew this: I was done letting other people's fears and expectations write my story. The reunion weekend ended with a quiet family dinner at Claire's house. Charles wasn't there. He'd declined the invitation when he learned I'd be present. His absence felt more like a relief than a rejection. Claire's children played in the next room, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the quiet conversation at the table. My mother sat beside me, her hand warm on my shoulder. She didn't try to fill the silence with platitudes. She just let me be. As we cleared the dishes, she pulled me aside. "I know I wasn't always the mother you needed," she said, "but I see you now, Lily. All of you. And I'm so proud." The words were like a balm on old wounds. I hugged her, feeling the truth of her love in the quiet strength of her embrace. Later that night, I packed up my hotel room and looked out at the city one last time. I thought of everything I was leaving behind and everything I was choosing to take forward. The girl who'd once measured her worth by a man who'd never truly seen her was gone. In her place was a woman who knew that her value didn't come from anyone else's approval. I drove back to New York the next day, the miles rolling by like a promise of something new. My apartment felt like a haven when I returned, small and simple, but completely mine. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on my balcony, and let the city's pulse remind me that life was waiting to be lived on my terms. A week later, I met Thomas. We sat across from each other in a quiet coffee shop near Central Park, the spring air sweet with the scent of blooming flowers. He looked so much like me, my eyes, my crooked smile, that it took my breath away. We talked for hours. About his life, about mine. About the years that had been lost and the years we still had. He didn't try to claim me, and I didn't expect him to. But there was a quiet understanding between us, a gentle curiosity that felt like the beginning of something real. "I don't know what kind of relationship we'll have," he said, "but I'd like to try if you're willing." I looked at him and felt a peace I hadn't known I'd been searching for. "I'd like that," I said simply. As I walked back to my apartment later, I realized that this was what freedom looked like. Not a clean slate, but a new chapter one I got to write. I didn't need Charles' approval. I didn't need anyone else to tell me who I was or what I was worth. I had my own story, and it was finally mine. As I poured a fresh cup of coffee the next morning, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. I wrote the words I'd never dared to believe before I'm enough. And this is just the beginning. Have you ever found yourself rewriting your own narrative? If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need a reminder that their worth isn't tied to anyone else's expectations. Subscribe to hear more stories of strength and self-discovery, and leave a comment sharing your journey. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away and choose ourselves.